know who else is alive.
I know, ma'am. Just stay on the phone with me, okay?
My whole family, there's 30 people, 25 people.
I know.
Who's coming immediately?
Who's in your house?
Immediately.
That call came in at 11:37 p.m. on Christmas Eve, 2008. Within minutes, every phone line at Covina Dispatch would light up with panicked reports from East Knollcrest Drive. But by the time first responders arrived at the Ortega family home, flames had already consumed most of the structure. What investigators would discover in the ashes would reveal a level of planning so meticulous, a betrayal so calculated, that even veteran detectives struggled to comprehend how a man dressed as Santa Claus could systematically destroy an entire family during what should have been their most joyful celebration of the year.
He was never like this. I'm shocked. I would never picture in my right mind he would ever do something to a family. I'm just devastated.
Before we examine this devastating case that forever changed how one community views Christmas, please consider subscribing to help these important stories reach more people who need to remember the victims whose voices were silenced too soon. Covina, California sits 22 miles east of Los Angeles, tucked beneath the San Gabriel Mountains. In 2008, its population of 45,000 knew it as a quiet place where serious crime rarely touched their tree-lined streets. The Ortega family had called East Knollcrest Drive home for decades. Joseph Ortega, 79, and his wife Alicia, 70, had raised 5 children in that house. By Christmas Eve, their family had grown to include spouses and 17 grandchildren. Every morning, Alicia walked her 2 dogs through the neighborhood. Joseph tended his garden. Neighbors later described them as the kind of people who made you feel like family the moment you met them. Their oldest son, James, 52, worked in construction. He'd married Teresa, 51, and they'd built a stable life together. Charles, 50, had found happiness with his wife Cherie, 45. The daughters, Letitia, Alicia, and Sylvia, each had their own families, their own stories. But it was Sylvia's story that would intersect with unimaginable violence. At 43, Sylvia Ortega Pardo was rebuilding her life. Her divorce from Bruce Jeffrey Pardo had been finalized exactly 1 week earlier, December 18th. The marriage had lasted less than 2 years, but the deception went back much further. They'd met in 2004 at church. Bruce appeared ideal, an aerospace engineer at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a church usher, no criminal record. They married in January 2006. The problem started immediately. Bruce refused to open joint bank accounts, refused to help support Sylvia's 3 children from a previous relationship. "They're your responsibility," he told her, despite earning $90,000 annually. But the worst revelation came months later. Bruce had a son, Matthew, a 13-month-old who'd suffered catastrophic brain damage in 2001 while in Bruce's care, an apparent drowning that left the child unable to walk, talk, or care for himself. Bruce collected a $100,000 insurance settlement, then vanished from Matthew's life completely. Never visited, never paid support. Yet every year, he claimed the disabled child as a tax deduction. When Sylvia discovered this, she understood who she'd married. A man who could abandon his brain-damaged infant son while profiting from him on tax forms was capable of anything. She filed for divorce in March 2008. The court ordered Bruce to pay $1,700 monthly in support. He called friends, raging that Sylvia was taking him to the cleaners. Then in July, Bruce was fired from JPL for billing fraud, claiming payment for hours never worked. The support payments were suspended. By December 18th, Sylvia received just $10,000, her wedding ring, and the family dog. She thought it was over. She didn't know Bruce had already purchased 4 handguns, commissioned a Santa suit, and marked December 24th on his calendar. December 24th started like every Christmas Eve at the Ortega home. Family members arrived throughout the afternoon. Children ran through rooms strung with lights. Adults gathered around the dining table for their traditional poker game. Laughter echoed off the walls. At 5:45 p.m., the family sat down for dinner. 17-year-old Michael Ortiz, Alicia's son, helped serve plates. 8-year-old Katrina Yusufpolsky, Letitia's daughter, bounced between relatives, too excited to sit still. By 11 p.m., some family members had left. 25 people remained. Adults cleaning up from dinner, children playing with new toys, teenagers gathered in corners sharing phones. None of them noticed the rental car that pulled up outside at 11:28 p.m. Inside the silver Dodge Caliber, Bruce Jeffrey Pardo made his final preparations. He'd driven from Montrose, about 30 miles away, carrying everything he needed for his planned attack. The Santa suit had cost $300, commissioned 2 months earlier from seamstress Jerry Deyot. He'd specifically requested an oversized costume with extra padding. Deyot later told investigators she understood why when news broke, the suit was designed to conceal weapons. Underneath the costume, Bruce had strapped 4 9mm Sig Sauer handguns to his body, along with 13 loaded magazines containing hundreds of rounds. He also carried a large gift-wrapped box containing his most destructive weapon, a homemade flamethrower. Bruce had modified an air compressor to spray racing fuel at high pressure, filling it with 18 gallons of accelerant. He'd tested the device previously and knew its capabilities. The timing wasn't random. The Ortega family had maintained a yearly tradition where a neighbor dressed as Santa visited their Christmas party. That neighbor had recently moved away, but Bruce, who'd attended these gatherings during his marriage to Sylvia, knew the children still expected Santa's arrival. He calculated they would open the door without suspicion. At 11:30 p.m., Bruce walked to the front door and rang the bell. Inside, 25 family members were scattered throughout the house. 8-year-old Katrina Yusufpolsky, daughter of Leticia Ortega, heard the doorbell and ran to answer. Her mother called for her to wait, but Katrina had already reached the door. When she opened it, she saw what appeared to be Santa Claus, red suit, white beard, carrying a large present. "Santa Claus! Santa Claus!" she exclaimed. Without speaking, Bruce drew a handgun and shot Katrina in the face. Leticia would later tell investigators she heard the shot from the dining room, saw her daughter stagger backward, blood streaming down her cheek. Before anyone could process what was happening, Bruce stepped through the doorway, began firing into the crowd. Everyone started panicking, Leticia recalled in her 911 call. "We all dove under the dining room table." Charles Ortega tried to rush the shooter. Bruce shot him multiple times. James attempted to shield his wife, Teresa. Both fell under the gunfire. Alicia Ortega, the 70-year-old matriarch, tried to protect her grandchildren. Bruce showed no hesitation. Some victims tried to fight back even after being wounded. A relative later told reporters, "Even bloodied, they stood up. They tried to grab him to stop him." But they couldn't. People fled in every direction, through doors, through windows. A 16-year-old girl jumped from a second-story window, breaking her ankle on impact. A young mother shielded her baby as she crawled beneath furniture. Leticia saw her injured daughter escape through the front door and made her own break for safety. The shooting lasted approximately 3 minutes, 180 seconds of methodical violence. Then, as the last gunshot echo died, Bruce set down his empty weapons and turned to the silver-wrapped package he'd carefully placed by the door. The gift looked festive enough, 3 feet tall, wrapped in metallic paper, topped with an oversized red velvet bow. Party guests who'd survived the initial attack, hiding behind furniture or playing dead on the floor, watched in confusion as the man in the Santa suit began unwrapping his own present. Inside was Bruce's masterpiece of destruction, a commercial air compressor he'd purchased in August, methodically modified in his garage over 4 months. He'd replaced the standard nozzle with a high-pressure racing fuel injector, reinforced the tank to hold 18 gallons instead of the standard 5, tested it in the Mojave Desert where he'd filmed himself spraying fuel streams 40 feet long. Bruce hefted the 70-pound device and began his second phase. He moved through the first floor systematically, spraying racing fuel across walls, furniture, carpet. The aerosol mist hung in the air like toxic fog. Witnesses hiding outside later described the smell, sharp, chemical, overwhelming even from across the lawn. His plan called for controlled ignition using a flare. Bruce had practiced this too, timing how long fuel vapors took to reach optimal concentration. But in a house lit for Christmas, with candles on the mantel and a pilot light burning in the kitchen stove, physics intervened. The explosion came at 11:34 p.m. The blast lifted Bruce off his feet, slamming him into the front door. Windows throughout the first floor burst outward simultaneously, showering the lawn with glass. The concussion knocked picture frames off walls 3 houses away. The fireball that followed reached temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Bruce's Santa suit, polyester velvet with acrylic fur trim, instantly became napalm against his skin. The fake beard melted into his jaw and neck. The padding liquefied, fusing with flesh on his arms and torso. His hands, which had been holding the sprayer, suffered the worst, third-degree burns that destroyed nerve endings down to bone. Somehow he managed to stand, to run. Neighbors flooded 911 with calls.
He's shooting. He's shooting.
What's your address? Ma'am, I understand. I need to know your address.
When he shot, I heard the shots and they were like poppers and I wasn't sure what it was, so everyone started panicking and running, so we all dove under the dining room. Some of us dove, some of us left. I don't know. My daughter's been shot. She was shot in the face on the side and she's bleeding.
I know, I let the officers know. The officers are making sure it's safe for the paramedics.
I need a bandage, please. I don't know who else is alive.
I know, ma'am. Just stay on the phone with me, okay?
My whole family, there's 30 people, 25 people.
I know.
By 11:37, all 6 emergency lines at Covina Dispatch were simultaneously active. Callers reported different pieces of the same nightmare: explosions, automatic gunfire, a massive structure fire, children jumping from windows, a burning figure in a Santa suit stumbling down the street. Lieutenant James Buchanan arrived first. His later testimony captured the scene. When I pulled up, it looked like the apocalypse. Fire was shooting 30 feet above the roofline. The heat was so intense we couldn't get within 50 feet of the structure. And the screaming, neighbors screaming about people trapped inside, survivors screaming for help, sirens screaming from every direction. Inside that inferno, 9 members of the Ortega family were beyond help. Some had died from gunshots before the fire reached them. Others succumbed to smoke inhalation as flames consumed the first floor. The heat grew so intense it melted copper pipes, incinerated wooden beams to ash, and destroyed the dental records that would normally identify victims. Fire crews battled the blaze for 8 hours. They poured 40,000 gallons of water onto the structure. But for the Ortega family trapped inside, those efforts came far too late. Joseph and Alicia Ortega, their sons James and Charles, James's wife Teresa, Charles's wife Sherry, their daughter Alicia Ortiz, Alicia's 17-year-old son Michael, and Sylvia, Bruce's ex-wife, his primary target, all shot before the fire consumed them.
When police and fire crews arrived just before midnight, the house on the quiet cul-de-sac was engulfed in flames. Police, responding to frantic 911 calls, found people running for their lives and heard descriptions of the nightmare inside.
They were told that a person had come to the house dressed in a Santa Claus outfit, and upon entering the house had opened fire on the persons attending a Christmas Eve celebration.
On first look, inspectors reported finding 3 charred corpses. In daylight, 3 more bodies were found.
Investigators would later find that he set up several rental cars across different parts of Los Angeles, like pieces on a chessboard. One of those cars was parked close to his ex-wife's divorce lawyer's home, which led detectives to believe the attorney might have been a secondary target he never got the chance to reach. Inside that vehicle were road maps stretching across the Southwest all the way down to Mexico, along with enough basic supplies to support someone traveling for days without stopping. He even booked a plane ticket out of LAX to Moline, Illinois, scheduled for early Christmas morning. To anyone who asked, He said he would be spending the holidays in Iowa with family. To support that lie, he wrapped $17,000 in cash around his body, sealing it under layers of plastic wrap and duct tape, money meant to keep him moving while on the run. But all of those plans collapsed the moment he suffered severe burns during the attack. Not long after midnight, security cameras caught him on an ATM surveillance video around 12:43 a.m. The footage showed a man barely able to stand from the pain. His hands were covered in makeshift bandages ripped from what was left of the Santa suit. Parts of the costume had fused into his skin from the extreme heat, and removing it would have required a hospital, something he clearly knew he couldn't risk. Instead of driving to the airport or heading toward the border as his escape plan outlined, Bruce made a desperate choice. He got back into his car and drove roughly 30 miles to Sylmar, where his brother Brad lived. At the time, Brad wasn't home. He was attending a Christmas party and wouldn't be back until around 3 a.m., leaving the house quiet, empty, and waiting. Investigators would later recover Bruce's car from Brad's driveway. Scattered around it were thousands of rounds of ammunition, enough to continue an attack or fuel multiple shootouts if Bruce had chosen to keep going. But the most disturbing element was the hidden device built into the vehicle. Detectives quickly realized that the car wasn't just packed with supplies, it was rigged to explode. Bruce had created a booby trap so precise that the bomb would detonate the moment anyone attempted to remove the Santa suit. It was a final act of violence he designed to unleash even after he was gone. The bomb squad spent hours examining the setup before safely triggering a controlled detonation, confirming that the mechanism wasn't amateur work. It required planning, patience, and a clear intent to cause as much destruction as possible. At approximately 1:30 in the morning, alone in his brother's quiet house, Bruce Jeffrey Pardo reached the end of his plan. Severely burned, exhausted, and knowing escape was no longer possible, he placed a 9mm handgun into his mouth and pulled the trigger. When Brad Pardo arrived home around 3 a.m., expecting to return from a Christmas party to peace and silence, he instead walked into a nightmare. Bruce's body was lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Nearby, detectives later found a second handgun. A bullet hole punched into the ceiling suggested Bruce might have fired a test shot first, either by accident out of hesitation or as a final moment of panic, before turning the weapon on himself. The autopsy report deepened the mystery around his state of mind. Examiners found cocaine in Bruce's system, which may explain how he managed to keep moving despite suffering burns so severe most people would have collapsed. But the drugs did nothing to explain the months of planning, the detailed preparation, or the decision to annihilate an entire family simply because a marriage had ended. His physical pain might have driven his final moments, but the destruction he caused was the result of choices he made long before Christmas Eve. For anyone who follows true crime, or for storytellers like us who've covered hundreds of cases, this is one of those stories that lingers long after you close the file. It's the type of case that forces you to confront how little we sometimes know about the people living right beside us. Bruce Pardo wasn't the kind of man neighbors whispered about or avoided. He was the unemployed aerospace engineer who still showed up every Sunday to volunteer as a church usher. The quiet guy who walked his dog at the same hour each morning, offering polite nods and friendly waves. On the outside, he looked stable, helpful, harmless. But behind that calm exterior, resentment was piling up like pressure inside a sealed container. In the years that followed, the house on East Knollcrest Drive, once the center of the Ortega family's holiday traditions, could no longer remain standing. It was demolished, erased from the neighborhood like a wound too deep to ignore. Today, the lot is a quiet patch of grass, an empty space that holds the weight of everything that happened there. Children once tore open presents in that living room. Grandparents once laughed, cooked, and told stories in that kitchen. Now, only the wind moves through the space. Yet every Christmas Eve, neighbors still stop by to place flowers, candles, and handwritten notes, a silent promise that the family will never be forgotten. For Letitia Yusufpolsky, the only Ortega sibling who survived the attack, the journey forward has been long and painful. She spent years piecing together a life that had been violently broken. Her daughter Katrina eventually healed from her physical injuries, but the emotional ones linger in ways only she can understand. Letitia has since turned to writing, sharing her story of rebuilding, of grief, and of slowly rediscovering hope. She has made it clear that Bruce Pardo's brutality will never define her family. Their strength, unity, and love came before him and will outlast his memory. Other survivors carry their own versions of the trauma. The teenager who jumped from a second-story window to save himself still lives with the memory of fire and chaos behind him. The young mother who shielded her baby has had to navigate life knowing she came within seconds of tragedy. Some survivors eventually moved away from Covina, choosing distance as a way to breathe again. Others stayed, determined to reclaim their homes and refuse the idea that one man's violence could push them out of their own community. And every December 24th, as the clock nears 11:30 at night, the city grows unusually still. People who lived through that night can't help but glance at the time. They remember the Ortega family setting up for their annual poker game. They remember kids racing around the house with energy only Christmas can spark. And they remember the sound of the doorbell, a simple chime that marked the last moment of normalcy before everything changed. In 2010, the punk icon Polystyrene of X-Ray Specs released a haunting track titled Black Christmas, written in response to the Covina massacre. The song immediately divided listeners. Some felt it tread too close to exploitation, turning a real family's suffering into art. Others believed it served an important purpose, a stark reminder that the victims should never disappear into the endless stream of forgotten tragedies. Whether welcomed or criticized, the song became part of the public memory, a piece of the Ortega family's legacy that reached far beyond the boundaries of their neighborhood. Because when violence is this senseless, when the loss is this enormous, what remains is the question of how we choose to remember. Sadly, tragedies on Christmas Eve aren't as rare as we'd hope. Another heartbreaking example is the Lawson family massacre, a case that left a deep, lasting impact on everyone who's heard it.
Whenever I went in there, some of them was laying there in the house dead, blood running every way.
And it was a very horrible scene. And now, this is their loved ones. I mean, imagine the shock and horror that they had.
Christmas is a time for joy, family, and togetherness, but it became a day of unspeakable horror for one North Carolina family in 1929. On December 25th, Charlie Lawson, a well-respected farmer in Germantown, shattered the holiday spirit forever when he brutally murdered his wife and 6 children. This then begs the question, what drove Charlie to commit such a monstrous act? Was it financial strain, madness, or something far more sinister? Stay tuned as we unravel the disturbing mystery behind the Lawson family murders, a tragedy that continues to haunt the small town of Germantown. Charles Davis Lawson, also known as Charlie Lawson, was born on May 10th in 1886 to Augustus and Nancy Lawson. The family lived in Lawsonville, where Lawson would later meet his wife, Franny Manring. Franny and Lawson got married in 1911 and went on to have 8 children. Unfortunately, their third child, a son named William, passed away when he was only 6 years old in 1920 due to pneumonia. The surviving children were 17-year-old Marie, 16-year-old Arthur, 12-year-old Carrie, 7-year-old Maybelle, 4-year-old James, 2-year-old Raymond, and 3-month-old Marilou. 7 years after he got married, Lawson moved his entire family to Germantown, a small town in North Carolina that to this day has a population of less than 1,000 people wanting to be close to his family. Lawson's 2 younger brothers, Elijah and Marion, lived in Germantown with their families and had paved the way for tobacco farming. Lawson began working as a sharecropper until he managed to accumulate enough money to buy a small piece of land for his family on Brook Cove Road. This land was right next to his brother's, which gave the family the much-needed family time that they had desired before moving to Germantown. He would work at the fields in the morning, and by evenings he would rebuild the tobacco barn along with Franny and their 2 older children, Marie and Arthur. One day while working inside the tobacco barn, Lawson had an accident with a piece of rotten timber and an axe. After his head injury, people around him began to notice changes in Lawson's personality. Although he was always known to have a temper, Lawson's anger outbursts not only got worse but also became more frequent. Perhaps this injury was what caused Lawson to kill his entire family a few years later. The Lawson family was known to be nice and normal in all the ways that mattered. Right before Christmas of 1929, the Lawsons had a particularly good tobacco harvest, which is why it was not odd when Lawson took his family shopping in Winston-Salem, another city in North Carolina, that was about 20 kilometers away from Germantown. Just 2 weeks away from Christmas, no one thought that it was out of the ordinary for the family to go shopping. Since it was the beginning of the Great Depression, it was not normal for working-class families to openly shop. This would only make sense if Lawson had premeditated the murders and was not thinking long-term. It was reported that Lawson had also told his family that the shopping was all part of a big Christmas surprise for the family. Lawson also took things one step further when he took the family to get a family portrait. Once again, this was uncommon and unheard of among working-class families, as it was a bit expensive. The family portrait itself was a bit strange, with Marie standing next to Lawson, looking angry and upset at something. To her left, Lawson looks smug, while Franny looks worried. To this day, no one knows the circumstances surrounding the strange family portrait. 2 weeks later, on December 25, 1929, Lawson and his oldest son, Arthur, went out rabbit hunting, a tradition that was followed every Christmas by the people in Germantown. This would also explain why no one was alarmed at the sound of shooting later that day. At the same time, his daughter, Marie, baked a 2-tiered cake and carefully decorated it with icing and raisins. By the time the 2 of them reached their hunting spot, Arthur realized that they did not have ammunition. He then asked Lawson if he had any ammunition, but was told that there were no bullets left. After Lawson sends Arthur to fetch more bullets from the market, he begins his massacre. To this day, no one knows why Arthur was sent away. Why did Lawson decide to keep his oldest son alive? Was it merely a coincidence, or carefully premeditated because he thought that Arthur might have been able to stop him? Marybelle and Carrie, who were on their way to their uncle's house to wish them a Merry Christmas, went through the tobacco barn, unaware that their father was hiding inside, waiting for them. As soon as the 2 of them passed by the barn, Lawson shot them with a 12-gauge shotgun. Although he managed to kill both of the girls, he waited for a bit before going back to them and bludgeoning them to make sure that they were really dead. He then went towards the house where 37-year-old Franny was sitting on the front porch steps, cutting potatoes. Lawson shot her in the chest once, killing her instantly. Hearing the commotion outside, Marie, who was still inside the house, started screaming and managed to tell her younger brothers, James and Raymond, to hide. However, Lawson shot Marie in the chest as well and killed her. He then went on to find the 2 younger boys and shot them dead as well. Things went from bad to worse when Lawson went up to the bedroom where 3-month-old Marilou lay in her crib. He bludgeoned her to death with the shotgun. It was reported that she died from a fractured skull. Since hunting was common during Christmas, no one arrived at the crime scene right away, giving Lawson a chance to escape along with the family's dogs. He headed into the woods outside of the house and circled around a dogwood tree, until hours later he finally turned the gun on himself and took his own life. Arthur, who was still buying ammunition, heard about the murders and rushed home only to discover a complete bloodbath. It was Lawson's younger brother Elijah and his 2 sons who discovered the bodies. Lawson had laid all of the bodies in front of the farmhouse with their arms crossed over their chest and rocks underneath their heads acting as pillows. The bodies seemed to be casket-ready since everyone was wearing the new clothes that Lawson had bought them just 2 weeks earlier.
Killed them all in the house there, but 2 girls, and he shot them right there at the barn and drug them in the barn and put rocks on their heads. Now, man's bound to be crazy to do things like that, you know. I don't believe I could do nothing like that with my family, because unless you was crazy or something bad wrong.
Since Germantown was a small town, it was not long until the entire community showed up at the Lawson household. While the community was still grappling with the harrowing crime scene in front of them, a loud gunshot was heard from the woodland nearby. A police officer along with Arthur rushed into the woods, only to find that Lawson had shot himself. His body was surrounded by letters addressed to his parents. However, the letters failed to identify the motive of his crimes. There were also 2 tobacco auction receipts found in Lawson's pocket with unfinished notes on them. One of the receipts said "trouble can cause," and the other one said "nobody to blame."
He shot himself over in the woods. He carried him a stick and turned the gun right towards his heart and shot himself right in the heart.
It was a horror story. I mean, it was a national story. It made the front page of the New York Times, so it was more than just a local story.
It reportedly snowed anywhere from 6 to 8 inches that day, which is why it was easy to discern that Lawson had walked around the dogwood tree as there was a patch of snow missing from the area, likely contemplating his next move. The Lawson family home was located on top of the hill, which made it harder to get the bodies down. Bed sheets were borrowed from the Lawson household to create makeshift sleds. The bodies were then dragged down the hill and taken to Walnut Cove Funeral House. However, since the town had a very small population, it was not surprising that the funeral home was not equipped to handle 8 bodies at once. The bodies were then transported to Madison Newton's funeral parlor on Murphy Street. The autopsies for all 8 bodies were conducted by Dr. C.J. Hasselbeck, who was the Stokes County coroner. He, along with Dr. Spotswood Taylor, a pathologist who worked at Johns Hopkins Medical Center in Baltimore, spent the entire night working together. Dr. Taylor, who was home for the Christmas holidays, decided to remove Lawson's brain from his head for further examination and placed it in a jar of preserved formaldehyde, a medical preservative. His reasoning for this was to examine the brain closely to see if any abnormalities would provide some insight into why Lawson had decided to go on a rampage. They discovered that although his brain was smaller than usual and the center part of it was underdeveloped, there were no abnormalities that stood out, or at least anything that would provide an explanation for his behavior. What makes things worse is that the entire Lawson family was buried together, so the victims were buried right next to their murderer. There were 7 graves because 3-month-old Marilou was buried in her mother's arms. The headstone inscription said, "Not now, but in the coming years. It will be in a better land. We'll read the meaning of our tears, and then sometime we'll understand." The news of the murders had taken the community by surprise, and it attracted tons of attention, as even the New York Times published a front-page article with a headline reading, "Stokes Farmer Kills Wife and 6 Children." People from all over the country drove up to attend the funeral. Over 5,000 people were in attendance, and the cars were lined as far as 4 kilometers down the block. Just 10 days after the funeral, Lawson's brother Marion opened the house to the public as a tourist attraction. Right away, he built a fence around the house. Although Marion experienced some pushback as people thought that it was morbid of him to cash off his family's murder, however, he justified it by saying that Arthur needed money to pay the mortgage on the house. True to his word, Marion charged 25 cents per person to walk through the bloodied murder scene. Nothing in the crime scene had been changed or moved around, including Marilou's bloody crib. People took a strange fascination towards the crime scene and even decided to take souvenirs. The house got 500 visitors a day due to the fact that Marion had put up ads in the newspaper that drew even more attention towards the Lawson family house. It was speculated that a man named John Dillinger, a well-known mobster who had escaped prison, made a stop at the house as well. He even left a note for the police to find, mocking them for their incompetence. As the house continued to attract visitors, someone decided to bring in a jar to collect Franny's blood from the front porch stairs. Bricks from the fireplace where Marie had died were also taken as souvenirs. The dogwood tree's bark that Lawson had died in front of had been stripped bare since people collected the bark as memorabilia. The last straw was people picking off the raisins from the cake Marie had baked on Christmas morning for her family. Marion then encased the cake in a glass container to stop people from taking pieces from the cake. The infamous cake remained on display for a long time. There are several conflicting reports that state that Marion buried the cake in front of the house when it was demolished, while others claim that Arthur went back to the house and took the cake with him. However, there is not enough evidence to prove that this happened. Some speculated that the cake that was displayed was replaced along with the raisins on it. By the end of January 1930, the family's belongings were auctioned off. From their clothes to the bloody crib and the murder weapon, everything was sold off. In fact, the murder weapons were sold for a large sum of money. After the auction, Marion set up a tent and sold off the last of the memorabilia of the Lawson family. Arthur chose to not publicly comment on anything regarding his family's murder. However, in an unfortunate turn of events in 1945, a 31-year-old Arthur was involved in a freak accident and passed away, leaving behind a wife and 4 children. The Lawson family house as well as the tobacco barn were demolished. Years later, people reported seeing ghosts of children running around the farmland, while others reported seeing Lawson's ghost around the dogwood tree. Although there is no proof of whether this is true, some claim that in autumn the leaves fall everywhere except for around the circular area where Lawson had paced before turning the gun on himself. The same thing was reported when it started snowing everywhere else except for the circular area. It seems that everyone decided to profit from the family's tragedy as Madison Newton's funeral parlor, which had changed its name to Madison Dry Goods in downtown Madison, decided to open up the upstairs mortuary for the public. The owners, Richard and Kathy Miller, decided to restore the original mortuary and even put up signed pictures of the Lawson family. The tragedy remained popular and had books, poems, and even songs written about it. One popular song called The Murder of the Lawson Family by Carolina Buddies gained traction and sold more than 8,000 units, which was a huge number as the Great Depression was beginning to set in. 2 notable books were published, one in 1990 by a father and daughter duo, Trudy J. Smith and M. Bruce Jones, called White Christmas, Bloody Christmas, and the other book was published in 2006 called The Meaning of Our Tears by Trudy J. Smith. Several theories flew around with people trying to speculate about Lawson's motive. However, only a few seemed plausible. One theory claimed that Lawson had witnessed an organized crime incident. This is why he, along with the rest of his family, was killed, but made to seem like a murder-suicide case. Another theory hypothesized that Lawson had developed a medical condition due to his incident with the axe. However, this theory was quickly debunked because Johns Hopkins Medical Center did not find any abnormalities in his brain that would explain his erratic behavior. It is not far-fetched to think that autopsies in that day and age were not as thorough as they are today, hence something could have been missed. Lawson's brain cannot be examined again due to the fact that it is very old and was not as well preserved as one would hope. One theory, which is one that is widely believed since there is some evidence to back this up, is that Marie was sexually assaulted by her father and had gotten pregnant as a result. This theory did not come out until 1990, when the book White Christmas, Bloody Christmas was published. The author interviewed a relative of the Lawson family named Stella Lawson, who was the daughter of Jetty Lawson. Jetty was Charlie Lawson's sister, but had died in 1928. Stella reported that she had heard some of the older women in her family talking about the fact that Franny had been worried about an incestuous relationship between her husband and daughter Marie. Since Jetty passed away a year before the murders, there was no way to confirm or deny these rumors. In the book The Meaning of Our Tears, Trudy J. Smith interviewed Ella May, a good friend of Marie Lawson. Ella reported that Marie had told her friends during a sleepover that she was pregnant with her father's child, and that her mother knew about it as well. Another testimony came from Sam Hill, a close friend and neighbor of the Lawson family, who claimed that the Lawsons were going through some serious troubles and that fights between Franny and Lawson had become more frequent. He also revealed that Lawson had threatened Marie and told her that if she exposed their relationship, there would be some killing done. Although the autopsies did not report any pregnancies, there can be several explanations for it, including the fact that the coroner could have hidden some of his findings to protect the family from more shame. Another explanation could be that the standard autopsy procedure at the time did not involve checking for potential pregnancies. There is no sure-shot way of knowing whether Marie was pregnant, because even if she was, it was probably too early in the pregnancy to tell anything. This theory could also not be pursued further, because by the time DNA sampling became common, Marie's body was far too old and decomposed to be able to tell anything. Since the coffins used were of lower quality as well, none of the bodies were preserved well enough for them to exhume them. This also brings us to the last theory, that Lawson found himself so deep in his financial problems that he decided to take out his entire family so that they could be together after death. After all, how can you explain why someone would kill a 3-month-old child? This is also plausible since the Great Depression had been setting in, and it affected working-class families, such as the Lawsons, the most. What do you think drove Charlie Lawson to murder his entire family? What theory seems the most likely motive? Do you think Marie Lawson knew something sinister was about to happen? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more videos like this, please be sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on more true crime videos. Thank you for watching.